The door creaked open, and all eyes in the upscale restaurant turned toward the entrance. A man shuffled in, his clothes ragged and stained, his face hidden beneath a scruffy beard and a worn-out hood. The smell of the streets seemed to follow him, a mix of sweat and damp earth. The diners exchanged uneasy glances, their forks hovering mid-air as the man made his way to the center of the room. The hostess, a young woman in a crisp black uniform, hesitated. She glanced at the manager, who was already striding over, his face a mask of polite concern. The man didn't wait for an invitation. He walked straight to an empty table and sat down, his movements slow but deliberate. The restaurant, usually filled with the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses, fell silent. A few customers whispered to each other, their voices barely audible but their discomfort palpable. The manager approached the table, his smile strained. "Sir, I'm afraid we have a dress code here," he said, his tone carefully measured. The man looked up, his eyes piercing, despite his disheveled appearance. "I'm here to eat," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. The manager hesitated, glancing around the room. The other diners were watching intently, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. Before the manager could respond, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. He placed it on the table, the bills crisp and unmistakably real. "I'll have the most expensive thing on the menu," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The manager blinked, momentarily speechless. He glanced at the cash, then back at the man. Finally, he nodded and signaled to a waiter. The young waiter, a man in his early 20s, approached the table cautiously. He handed the man a menu, his hands trembling slightly. The man didn't even glance at the menu. "Surprise me," he said, leaning back in his chair. The waiter nodded and hurried away, his mind racing. The other staff members exchanged uneasy looks, unsure how to handle the situation. The diners returned to their meals, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air was thick with tension, curiosity, and judgment. As the waiter returned with a plate of the restaurant's signature dish, a perfectly seared steak with truffle butter, the man leaned forward and inhaled deeply. A small smile played on his lips. He picked up his fork and knife, his movements surprisingly graceful, and began to eat. The room watched in stunned silence as the man savored each bite, his expression one of pure contentment. The contrast between his appearance and his demeanor was striking, and it left everyone wondering, who was this man? And why was he here? The tension in the room reached a breaking point when the man finished his meal and stood up. He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a business card. He handed it to the young waiter, who stared at it in shock. The card read, Elon Musk. The man turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and unanswered questions. The moment the mysterious man left the restaurant, the room erupted in whispers. The young waiter stood frozen, clutching the business card in his hand. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Elon Musk? The billionaire entrepreneur? Here? Disguised as a homeless man? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of him. Meanwhile, the man, now revealed to be Elon Musk, walked down the dimly lit street, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his tattered jacket. The night air was cool, and the city buzzed around him, oblivious to the experiment he had just conducted. As he walked, his mind drifted back to the beginning of this unusual journey. It had started weeks ago, during a late-night brainstorming session at one of his companies. Elon had been discussing the concept of empathy with his team. They talked about how people often judge others based on appearances, and how those judgments could lead to missed opportunities for connection and understanding. What if I could experience it firsthand? Elon had asked, his curiosity piqued. What if I could see how people treat someone who looks like they have nothing? The idea had taken root, and soon, Elon found himself preparing for the experiment. He spent hours studying the lives of homeless individuals, learning about their struggles and the challenges they faced daily. He worked with a makeup artist to create a convincing disguise, ensuring that no one would recognize him. When the day finally came, Elon felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. He knew the experiment would be challenging, but he was determined to see it through. He started by spending a few days living on the streets, sleeping in shelters, and eating at soup kitchens. The experience was humbling, to say the least. He felt the sting of judgmental glances and the cold indifference of passers-by. He experienced hunger, exhaustion, and the constant struggle to find a safe place to rest. But he also witnessed small acts of kindness, a stranger offering a sandwich, a volunteer at a shelter going out of their way to make him feel welcome. These moments stayed with him, fueling his determination to understand the human condition better. He wanted to see how people would react when faced with someone who appeared to have nothing, especially in a setting where wealth and status were often flaunted. That's how he ended up in the high-end restaurant, sitting at a table surrounded by people who judged him without knowing his story. The experience had been eye-opening, to say the least. He had seen the best and worst of humanity in just a few short hours. As Elon continued walking, he thought about the young waiter who had served him. There had been something different about him, a kindness that stood out amidst the judgment and discomfort. Elon made a mental note to find out more about him. Back at the restaurant, the young waiter was still trying to make sense of what had happened. He showed the business card to the manager, who stared at it in disbelief. "Do you think it's real?" the waiter asked, his voice trembling. The manager shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But if it is, this changes everything." The other staff members gathered around, their earlier discomfort replaced by curiosity and awe. The diners, too, were abuzz with speculation. Some dismissed the idea as a prank, while others wondered if they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The young waiter, however, couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random encounter. He remembered the way the man had looked at him, not with pity or disdain, but with a quiet understanding. It was a look that stayed with him, long after the man had left. As the night wore on, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of the mysterious stranger lingered. For the young waiter, it was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that kindness was a currency more valuable than money. The restaurant was closing for the night, but the staff was far from relaxed. The encounter with the mysterious man, now believed to be Elon Musk, had left everyone on edge. The young waiter, still clutching the business card, sat at a corner table, staring at it as if it might reveal more secrets. The manager paced back and forth, his mind racing with questions. "What if it's real?" the manager muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "What if Elon Musk was actually here, in our restaurant, and we almost turned him away?" The other staff members exchanged uneasy glances. The hostess, who had been the first to greet the man, looked visibly shaken. "I didn't know what to do," she admitted. "He looked, well, you saw him. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I also didn't want to upset the other customers." The young waiter finally spoke up. "I think we did the right thing," he said quietly. "We served him. That's what matters." The manager stopped pacing and turned to face him. But what if it wasn't him? What if it was just some guy pretending to be Elon Musk? We could have been made fools of. The waiter shrugged. "Does it really matter? He paid for his meal, and he didn't cause any trouble. Maybe the lesson here is that we should treat everyone the same, no matter how they look." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The staff fell silent, each person reflecting on their own actions. The manager, in particular, seemed deep in thought. He had been the one to hesitate, the one who had almost asked the man to leave. Now, he couldn't help but wonder what that said about him. Meanwhile, the young waiter couldn't stop thinking about the man's eyes. There had been something in them. A depth, a wisdom, that had struck him deeply. He had seen hardship in those eyes, but also resilience. It was a look he recognized, because he had seen it in the mirror many times. The waiter's own story wasn't an easy one. He had grown up in a small town, the son of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Money had always been tight, and opportunities had been few and far between. When he moved to the city to chase his dreams, he had faced countless rejections and setbacks. This job at the restaurant was supposed to be a stepping stone, but sometimes it felt more like a dead end. Serving the mysterious man had reminded him of something important, that everyone had a story, even if it wasn't immediately visible. The man's ragged clothes and unkempt appearance had hidden a truth that no one could have guessed. It made the waiter wonder how many other people he had judged unfairly, without ever knowing their struggles. As the staff began to clean up for the night, the manager pulled the young waiter aside. "You handled that situation well," he said, his tone softer than usual. "I don't know if that was really Elon Musk, but you showed a lot of class tonight." The waiter nodded, feeling a small sense of pride. "Thanks. I guess I saw a bit of myself in him, you know?" The manager gave him a thoughtful look. "Maybe we all did." The conversation lingered in the waiter's mind as he left the restaurant and headed home. The city was quiet now, the streets empty except for the occasional passerby. He thought about the man's parting words, the way he had handed over the business card without a hint of arrogance. It was as if he had wanted to leave a message, not just for the waiter, but for everyone in the restaurant. That message, the waiter realized, was about more than just kindness. It was about seeing people for who they truly were, beyond the surface. It was about recognizing the humanity in everyone, no matter their circumstances. As he walked, the waiter made a silent promise to himself: he would carry that lesson with him, not just at work, but in every aspect of his life. He didn't know if he would ever see the mysterious man again, but he knew one thing for certain: that encounter had changed him. The next morning, the restaurant was abuzz with chatter. News of the mysterious man's visit had spread like wildfire, and everyone wanted to know more. The staff arrived to find a small crowd gathered outside, some curious onlookers and others hoping to catch a glimpse of the place where Elon Musk, or his doppelganger, had dined. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The manager held a quick meeting with the staff, urging them to stay professional and not to engage in speculation. "We don't know who that man was," he said firmly. "Until we do, we treat this like any other day." But it wasn't just the staff who were affected. The customers who had been present that night were also grappling with what they had witnessed. Among them was an elderly couple who had been sitting at a table near the mysterious man. They had watched the entire scene unfold, their initial discomfort giving way to curiosity and, eventually, compassion. The husband, a retired teacher with a kind face, had been the first to speak up. "Let the man eat in peace," he had said when another customer complained. His wife, a petite woman with silver hair, had nodded in agreement. "Everyone deserves a little dignity," she added softly. Their words had struck a chord with some of the other diners, but not everyone had been so understanding. A well-dressed businessman at a nearby table had been particularly vocal, insisting that the restaurant should have asked the man to leave. "This is a place for fine dining, not charity," he had muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Now, as the elderly couple returned to the restaurant for their usual breakfast, they couldn't help but notice the change in the air. The staff seemed more attentive, the customers more reflective. The couple took their usual table, and the young waiter approached them with a smile. "Good morning," he said, his tone warm but slightly hesitant. "Can I get you your usual?" The husband nodded, but his wife leaned forward, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Were you working the night that man came in?" she asked. The waiter hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, I was." The woman's face lit up. "What was he like? Did he say anything to you?" The waiter glanced around, making sure the manager wasn't within earshot. "He was different," he said carefully. "Quiet, but there was something about him. He seemed wise, I guess. Like he'd seen a lot of the world." The couple exchanged a knowing look. "We thought so too," the husband said. There was something about the way he carried himself. It wasn't what you'd expect from someone in his position. The waiter nodded, feeling a sense of validation. "Exactly. And when he left, well, let's just say he left quite an impression." The couple leaned in closer, eager to hear more, but the waiter shook his head with a small smile. "I probably shouldn't say too much. but I will say this, I think he was trying to teach us something. The woman's eyes softened. Kindness, she said simply. That's what it was about, wasn't it? The waiter nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. Yeah. Kindness. As he walked away to place their order, the couple sat in thoughtful silence. They had always believed in the power of small acts of kindness, but this experience had reinforced that belief in a way they hadn't expected. Meanwhile, at another table, the businessman from the previous night was also reflecting on his actions. He had come back to the restaurant out of curiosity, but also because he couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something important. As he sipped his coffee, he found himself replaying the scene in his mind. Had he been too quick to judge? The man had paid for his meal, after all. And there had been something about him, something that didn't quite fit the image of a typical homeless person. The businessman sighed, feeling a pang of guilt. Maybe he had been too harsh. As the morning wore on, the restaurant became a hub of quiet reflection. Customers who had been present that night shared their thoughts with each other, while newcomers listened with rapt attention. The story of the mysterious man had taken on a life of its own, becoming a topic of conversation that transcended the usual small talk. For the young waiter, it was a reminder of the power of human connection. He had always believed that everyone had a story, but now he understood just how important it was to listen to those stories, no matter how unlikely they might seem. As he served the elderly couple their breakfast, he felt a sense of gratitude. The encounter with the mysterious man had not only changed him, but had also brought out the best in others. And in a world that often felt divided, that was something worth holding on to. The young waiter couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man. The encounter had left a mark on him, one that went deeper than he had initially realized. As he went about his duties, his mind kept drifting back to the man's calm demeanor, his piercing eyes, and the way he had handed over the business card without a word of explanation. That evening, as the restaurant began to fill with its usual crowd, the waiter noticed a familiar face walking through the door. It was the elderly couple from the morning, back for dinner. They smiled warmly at him as they were seated, and he felt a sense of comfort in their presence. But it wasn't just the couple who caught his attention. Sitting at a corner table, alone and deep in thought, was the businessman who had been so vocal the night before. He looked different now, less sure of himself, almost contemplative. The waiter hesitated for a moment before deciding to approach him. "Good evening, sir," he said, his tone polite but cautious. "Can I get you something to drink?" The businessman looked up, his expression softening slightly. "Just water for now, thank you." The waiter nodded and returned a few minutes later with a glass of water. As he set it down, the businessman spoke again, his voice quieter than usual. "You were here last night, weren't you?" The waiter nodded. "Yes, I was." The businessman sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about what happened. I might have been too harsh." The waiter was surprised by the admission, but didn't let it show. "It was a strange situation," he said carefully. "I think everyone was just caught off guard." The businessman shook his head. "No, it was more than that. I judged him without knowing anything about him. And now, well, I can't stop wondering if I was wrong." The waiter hesitated, then decided to share a bit of his own perspective. "I think we all judge people sometimes," he said. "But what matters is what we do after. Whether we let that judgment define our actions, or whether we choose to see the person behind it." The businessman looked at him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're wise for someone so young." The waiter smiled faintly. "I've had my share of struggles. Maybe that's why I try not to judge too quickly." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another customer, and the waiter excused himself to attend to them. But as the night went on, he found himself drawn back to the businessman's table. There was something about the man's vulnerability that resonated with him, a reminder that everyone had their own battles to fight. Later, as the restaurant began to quiet down, the waiter noticed the elderly couple preparing to leave. He approached their table, feeling a sense of gratitude for their kindness. Thank you for coming back, he said sincerely. It means a lot. The woman smiled warmly. We wanted to see how you were doing. That night, it must have been quite an experience for you. The waiter nodded. It was. But it also taught me something important. The husband leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. And what's that? The waiter took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. That everyone has a story. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to be a small part of it. The couple exchanged a knowing look, their smiles filled with quiet understanding. You're a good soul, the woman said softly. Don't ever lose that. As they left, the waiter felt a sense of peace settle over him. The encounter with the mysterious man had been unexpected, but it had also been a gift, a reminder of the power of empathy and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. But the night wasn't over yet. As the waiter cleared the last of the tables, he noticed the businessman still sitting in the corner, lost in thought. He approached him again, this time with a cup of coffee in hand. On the house, he said, setting the cup down. The businessman looked up, surprised. Thank you, he said quietly. The waiter hesitated, then decided to take a chance. You know, I think what happened last night was meant to teach us something. Not just you or me, but all of us. The businessman raised an eyebrow. And what's that? The waiter smiled. That we're all human. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is just, be kind. The businessman stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, he said finally. I think I needed to hear that. As the waiter walked away, he felt a sense of fulfillment. The encounter with the mysterious man had sparked a chain reaction, one that was still unfolding. And in that moment, he realized that the true power of the experience wasn't in the mystery of the man's identity, but in the way it had brought people together, reminding them of their shared humanity. The next day, the restaurant was busier than ever. Word had spread about the mysterious man's visit, and people were flocking to the establishment, hoping to catch a glimpse of the place where the supposed Elon Musk had dined. The staff was overwhelmed, but the young waiter couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The encounter had put their restaurant on the map, but more importantly, it had sparked a meaningful conversation about kindness and judgment. As the lunch rush began to wind down, the waiter noticed a familiar figure walking through the door. It was the mysterious man, clean-shaven, dressed in a sharp suit, and unmistakably Elon Musk. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. The manager, who had been skeptical all along, rushed over, his face a mixture of shock and awe. Mr. Musk, he stammered, we had no idea it was you. Please, let me apologize for any. Elon raised a hand, cutting him off. No need to apologize, he said with a small smile. In fact, I should be thanking you. The manager blinked, unsure how to respond. Thanking us? Elon nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. Yes. What happened here the other night was part of an experiment. I wanted to see how people would react to someone who appeared to have nothing. And while there were moments of judgment, there were also moments of kindness. And those moments, they're what matter. The young waiter, who had been standing nearby, felt his heart race. He had known, deep down, that the man was someone extraordinary, but seeing him now, in his true form, was still overwhelming. Elon turned to the waiter, his expression softening. You, he said, pointing to him. You showed me something special that night. The waiter stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. I just treated you like I would anyone else, he said quietly. Elon shook his head. No, it was more than that. You saw me as a person, not as a problem. And that's rare. The waiter felt a lump form in his throat. He had always tried to treat people with kindness, but he had never expected it to be noticed, let alone by someone like Elon Musk. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, handing it to the waiter. I'd like to offer you a job, he said. At one of my companies. I think you'd be a great fit. The waiter stared at the card, his mind racing. A job at one of Elon's companies? It was an opportunity he had never dreamed of. The manager, who had been watching the exchange with a mix of envy and admiration, stepped forward. "Mr. Musk, if there's anything we can do to make up for..." Elon cut him off again, this time with a laugh. "There's nothing to make up for. In fact, I'd like to invite your entire staff to a charity event I'm hosting next week. It's about giving back to the community, and I think you'd all be a great addition." The manager's eyes widened in surprise. "We'd be honored," he said quickly. Elon nodded, then turned back to the waiter. "Think about my offer," he said. "And remember, kindness is a currency more valuable than money." With that, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces. The waiter stood there, clutching the card, his mind spinning. He had always believed in the power of kindness, but now he saw that it could open doors he had never imagined. As the staff gathered around him, their earlier skepticism replaced by awe and excitement, the waiter felt a sense of hope. The encounter with the mysterious man had been life-changing, not just for him, but for everyone in the restaurant. And as he looked down at the card in his hand, he realized that the true lesson wasn't about the man's identity or the opportunities he had offered. It was about the power of empathy, the importance of seeing beyond appearances, and the impact that a single act of kindness could have. The days following Elon Musk's revelation were a whirlwind of activity for the restaurant and its staff. News outlets picked up the story, and the restaurant became a local sensation. Customers poured in, not just for the food, but to experience the place where something extraordinary had happened. The young waiter, now a minor celebrity in his own right, found himself at the center of attention. But amidst the chaos, the waiter remained grounded. He hadn't yet decided whether to accept Elon's job offer. The opportunity was incredible, but it also felt overwhelming. He had always dreamed of something more, but now that it was within reach, he wasn't sure if he was ready. One evening, as the restaurant began to quiet down, the manager approached him. "Have you made a decision yet?" he asked, his tone more curious than pushy. The waiter shook his head. "Not yet. It's a big step, you know? I don't want to mess it up." The manager nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that. But don't sell yourself short. You earned this." The waiter smiled faintly. "Thanks. I guess I'm still processing everything." As he spoke, the elderly couple walked in, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "There he is," the woman exclaimed, her voice filled with warmth. "We've been following the news. How are you holding up?" The waiter chuckled. "It's been a lot, but I'm okay. Thanks for asking." The couple sat down at their usual table, and the waiter brought them their usual order. As he set the plates down, the husband looked up at him, his eyes filled with pride. "You know, what you did that night, it wasn't just about being kind. It was about standing up for what's right. And that's something not everyone can do." The waiter felt a lump form in his throat. "I just treated him like a person," he said quietly. "Exactly," the woman replied. "And that's what made all the difference." Their words stayed with him as he continued his shift. Later that night, as he was closing up, he noticed the businessman from the previous week sitting at a corner table. The man looked different now, less guarded, more reflective. The waiter approached him, feeling a sense of curiosity. "Can I get you anything?" he asked. The businessman shook his head. "No, I'm fine. I wanted to come back. To see the place where it all happened." The waiter nodded, sensing that there was more to the man's visit. "It's been a crazy week," he said, trying to break the ice. The businessman sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking a lot about that night. About how I acted. I wasn't at my best." The waiter hesitated, then decided to be honest. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is what we do after." The businessman looked at him, his expression softening. "You're wise beyond your years, you know that?" The waiter smiled faintly. "I've had good teachers." The conversation lingered in his mind as he left the restaurant that night. The encounter with Elon Musk had been life-changing, but it had also brought out the best in the people around him. The elderly couple, the businessman, even the manager, they had all been affected in some way, and it was a reminder of the ripple effect of kindness. As he walked home, the waiter thought about Elon's words, "Kindness is a currency more valuable than money." It was a lesson he had always believed in, but now he saw it in action. The simple act of treating someone with dignity had sparked a chain reaction, one that was still unfolding. And as he looked up at the night sky, he realized that the true power of the experience wasn't in the opportunities it had brought, but in the connections it had created. It was a reminder that, no matter how different we may seem on the surface, we're all human. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is just be kind. The story of the mysterious man, now confirmed to be Elon Musk, spread far beyond the restaurant. News outlets, social media, and even local community groups were abuzz with the tale. People were inspired by the idea that a simple act of kindness could lead to something so extraordinary. The young waiter, whose name had become synonymous with compassion, found himself at the heart of a movement. One evening, as the restaurant prepared for its busiest night yet, the waiter received a call. It was from a local charity organization, asking if he would be willing to speak at an event about his experience. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he had ever considered, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized it was an opportunity to spread the message that had changed his life. The event was held at a community center, and the room was packed with people from all walks of life. As the waiter stepped onto the stage, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He looked out at the crowd, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "A few weeks ago, something happened that changed my life," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A man walked into the restaurant where I work. He looked like he had nothing, but he taught me everything." He went on to share the story, the initial judgment, the moments of hesitation, and the eventual realization that the man was Elon Musk. But he also spoke about the deeper lesson he had learned, the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, beyond their appearance or circumstances. "Kindness isn't just about being nice," he said. "It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone. It's about understanding that we all have struggles, and that a little compassion can go a long way." The audience listened in rapt attention, many nodding in agreement. When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People lined up to shake his hand, share their own stories, and thank him for reminding them of the power of kindness. Meanwhile, the restaurant continued to thrive. The manager, inspired by the experience, had implemented a new policy: no one would ever be turned away based on their appearance. The staff had embraced the change, and the restaurant had become a symbol of inclusivity and compassion in the community. The elderly couple, who had been regulars for years, became unofficial ambassadors for the restaurant. They shared their story with anyone who would listen, encouraging others to practice kindness in their own lives. Even the businessman, who had once been so quick to judge, had undergone a transformation. He had started volunteering at a local shelter, using his resources to help those in need. When he visited the restaurant one evening, he pulled the waiter aside. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his tone sincere. "What you did that night, it made me realize how much I had to learn. You changed my life." The waiter smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just treated him like a person." The businessman shook his head. "That's exactly what made it special." As the days turned into weeks, the ripple effect of the encounter continued to grow. People across the city, and beyond, were inspired to perform their own acts of kindness. Social media was flooded with stories of strangers helping each other, of small gestures that made a big difference. For the young waiter, it was a reminder of the impact one person could have. He had started as a simple restaurant worker, but through his actions, he had become a symbol of hope and compassion. And as he stood in the restaurant one evening, looking out at the bustling crowd, he realized that the true power of the experience wasn't in the fame or the opportunities it had brought. It was in the connections it had created, the lives it had touched. And the reminder that, no matter how divided the world might seem, kindness could bring us together. The young waiter stood at the edge of the restaurant's kitchen, watching the bustling dining room with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The once simple establishment had become a beacon of hope and kindness, a place where people from all walks of life came not just for the food, but for the sense of community it offered. The story of the mysterious man, Elon Musk, had transformed not only the restaurant but also the lives of everyone connected to it. As he wiped down the counter, the waiter thought about the journey he had been on. From a struggling young man trying to make ends meet to someone who had inspired an entire community, it had been a whirlwind of emotions and experiences. But through it all, one thing had remained constant: his belief in the power of kindness. That evening, as the restaurant began to wind down, the waiter received a message. It was from Elon Musk himself, inviting him to a private meeting. The message was simple but heartfelt: "Your actions reminded me why I started this experiment. Let's talk." The next day, the waiter found himself sitting across from Elon in a quiet cafe. The billionaire looked different in this setting, less like the larger-than-life figure he was often portrayed as, and more like an ordinary person. "Thank you for coming," Elon said, his tone warm but direct. "I wanted to meet you in person to thank you for what you did that night." The waiter nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and gratitude. "I didn't do anything special," he said humbly. Elon shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. What you did was extraordinary. You treated me with dignity when no one else would. And that's rare." The waiter hesitated, then decided to ask the question that had been on his mind. "Why did you do it? The experiment, I mean." Elon leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I've spent my life trying to change the world through technology and innovation. But sometimes, I wonder if we're losing sight of what really matters: our humanity. I wanted to see if people could still see the person behind the appearance. And you proved that they can." The waiter felt a lump form in his throat. "I just treated you like I would anyone else," he said quietly. "Exactly," Elon replied. "And that's what made all the difference." The two talked for hours, sharing stories and ideas. By the end of the conversation, the waiter felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had always believed in the power of kindness, but now he saw it as something even greater, a force that could change the world. As he left the cafe, the waiter thought about the lessons he had learned. The encounter with Elon Musk had been life-changing, but it had also been a reminder of something important: that everyone has a story, and that kindness is the key to understanding those stories. When he returned to the restaurant, he found the staff and customers waiting for him. They had heard about the meeting and were eager to know how it had gone. The waiter smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude for the community that had supported him. "It went well," he said simply. "But the real lesson isn't about me or Elon. It's about all of us. It's about remembering that, no matter who we are or where we come from, we all deserve to be treated with kindness." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, slowly, the applause began, a quiet, heartfelt acknowledgement of the truth he had spoken. As the waiter looked around the room, he realized that the true power of the experience wasn't in the fame or the opportunities it had brought. It was in the connections it had created, the lives it had touched, and the reminder that, no matter how divided the world might seem, kindness could bring us together. And as he stood there, surrounded by the people who had become like family, he knew that the story wasn't just about one night in a restaurant. It was about the enduring power of humanity, and the simple, profound truth that kindness can change the world.